I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. It is Christmas Eve. Getting excited. This is our one day off of games for the next little bit. We have 2 games tomorrow. We have a game on Thursday. I think there's some of the college games again on Friday. Full slate of 3 NFL games on Saturday. Full Sunday and Monday, so plenty of football to serve as a welcome addition or distraction to all of your holiday revelry. Once we get through today, where we're probably, some of us are licking our wounds, some of us are getting ready for a championship run. I will say in the Fantasy Football Roundtable Redraft League, I was 90% sure that I was going down to our friend Dwight on Monday night.
Dwight of the auto draft team.
I was 99% sure I was going down to Dwight at halftime of that game when he was only a couple points behind. But thanks to Green Bay being up big and Josh Jacobs dinging up his shoulder, they decided to put him on the bench. And that allowed me to hold on for a 1-point victory. I felt bad for him, but I felt better for me. So, pretty fun tidings. I don't know, how did you fare in your semifinal?
I got blown out by Andrew Tuck's loophole. It wasn't even close. So there were no errors. I had a couple guys. I had Tank Dell on my bench have a good game. Somebody else on my bench have a good game. Spears. I could have played Spears over Pacheco. It was just his team was better overall. The Josh Jacobs thing. So I made of the 11 teams that I deemed to be competitive in my dynasty leagues this year, 8 of them made the playoffs. 4 of them had first round buys. I missed 3 of my 8 playoff teams are in the finals. Josh Jacobs cost me one by 2.87 points. As soon as I heard the announcer go, Jacobs is coming off dragging his arm, I was like, oh, F me. Because they're already up 24-0 or 21. I'm like, geez.
There's no chance they're putting him back in, especially after they had some other injuries.
And I had another one where, I'd been riding Guerrero as my RB3, and I waited, and it was a standard scoring league, and I ended up leaving Guerrero in there, and then instead of putting Gus Edwards in for the Thursday night game, I lost by 5.6 points. Now, I'm not going to chalk that one up to the Guerrero Edwards thing. That one was because I lost Jalen Hurts. So I would be 5 of 8. I was like right around 8 points out from having 5 teams in the finals. Couple of them, I got 3 teams in. 2 of them I feel real strong about. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Well, let's take a look at the week that was in week 16, and that started on Saturday with the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the Houston Texans. They got the 27-19 victory, but it was worse than that for the Texans. 2nd December in a row, Tank Dell making a catch in the end zone, suffers a massive injury. This one looked ugly. It sounds ugly. A lot of tendons torn, kneecap dislocated, some breaks in there. This is the second year in a row his season has ended with a major injury. It felt like he was a little slow coming back and a little slower this year than he was as a rookie. Now it's fair to wonder when he would be ready in year 3. What is this doing for some of his long-term fantasy value?
I think it definitely puts a damper on it. It was December 23rd last year when he broke his fibula, or December.
I feel like it was I think it was
was
the first week in December.
Yeah, it was early. My note really reads December of 23. When he broke his left fibula. Now he's dislocated and tore up that knee. The talk is that it's going to flow solidly into the 2025 season. He's a talented player. He's had 6 double-digit games this year. But I think he could very well rehab this knee, get back to 100%, and go the rest of his career without a significant injury. But right now, he's had a couple fluky injuries, and you may likely see him flying around out there with the injury-prone tag. Excuse me. With the injury-prone tag. If I can stash him at a discount, I might ride it out in Dynasty just to see. CJ Stroud's a pretty good quarterback. Stroud likes him. While he's down this year, I think, that team in general I think they've faced some adversity this year and they're growing. That's always a good thing. I'm not going out. Dell is not a target. He's more a guy I might see if I can get thrown in on a deal. If I add, a late second or third round pick or something, just to try to get a sweetener on a deal.
Meanwhile, for the Chiefs, there was a lot of excitement about another guy coming back from a broken leg, and that was Isaiah Pacheco. But he continues to split carries with Kareem Hunt, and it's not that robust a backfield. He's only had 44, 55, 32, and 26 yards in the 4 games since returning. If you are in a championship round, is it fair to consider benching him?
Oh, I think definitely. There are a lot of running backs I think you would consider. To me, he's in the flex consideration. So he's not, I don't think I would have him in my top 24. It's that team. They're not a rushing powerhouse. They've been playing a lot more close games, but they split the carries between Hunt and Pacheco so evenly. Even when Pacheco he starts the game, has a good series, they still will bring Hunt in and give him play, which is, going back to Cleveland with Nick Chubb, it's can be maddening sometimes. So it depends on your options, but yeah, he's definitely a candidate to ride the pine in the title game.
You're saying that 2.6 points just in getting it done for you.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
The other Saturday game featured the Baltimore Ravens hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game was tied at 17 at one point, but the Ravens pulled away, getting the 34-17 victory. These two teams now tied record-wise, so should be a fun last 2 weeks as they battle for the AFC North. Meanwhile, a third straight game with no George Pickens. We're hoping that he'll be back on Christmas Day, but we've seen Calvin Austin step up a little bit. He had 4 for 65 on Sunday. For the season, actually has 517 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. Maybe not the most conventional of receivers, but do you have any long-term interest in Austin?
He's a guy that if he can get an established role, he's not a 1. He's maybe a 2A kind of guy. He's got some outside capability because he is fast. His size tends to, I think, pigeonhole him a little bit as a slot receiver. But, he's a dynamic playmaker. He can go get the ball, and that's the kind of guy you want across from someone like George Pickens. He certainly seems a little bit more reliable, can do more with fewer targets than a lot of receivers in the game. I think as we head into 2025, Pittsburgh will probably try to bring somebody in a la Mike Williams this year. Maybe they keep Big Mike around and think that, given an off season in their offense, he'll take some steps. But I think Calvin Austin right now is the 2 in Pittsburgh. All in all, Russell Wilson threw for more yards. He rushed for more yards. He had the same number of interceptions as Lamar Jackson. Baltimore just had Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, or Pittsburgh didn't.
Yeah, they do not have enough weapons in Pittsburgh. Hopefully they will get that corrected. For the Ravens, we saw Isaiah Likely have a huge game on opening night. He sporadically had some good games throughout the season, but not quite the takeoff we thought we might see. And we've seen Andrews bounce back a little bigger. How are you feeling about Likely as a long-term play?
I like him. He's tight end 17 on the year. So he isn't somebody that you're starting on a consistent basis. In super deep leagues or these 2 tight end leagues that I'm in a couple of, he's somebody you probably are rolling out there because he does have upside. Unfortunately, he's behind Mark Andrews. Now, even this year, with the way the wide receiver crew has stepped up and the addition of Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews' volume is way down. Andrews and Likely are playing essentially, I think Likely's 59% of the snaps and Andrews is 61% of the snaps on the year. So they're playing roughly the same amount of time. Andrews has 1 year left on his contract. He's 30 years old. Could likely be his successor. He could be. I know they like Charlie Kolar, who just went on injured reserve. So they could, after next year, they could roll on with Likely and Collar as their 2 tight ends and probably not miss a beat. Andrews has bounced back. He's tight end 6. I think a lot of it has been touchdown volume lately to boost him up there because he's had several games where it's 3 catches for 27 yards and a touchdown, and that touchdown's really what puts him over. He's not having those big 8 or 9 catch games like we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I think it's fair to wonder if returning from injury and maybe that car accident at the beginning of the season had more of an impact than we realized.
Well, and their wide receivers have really blossomed with Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. That's really been something too that has developed in Baltimore.
Next up, the Giants went to Atlanta on Sunday, and it was a 34-7 Falcons victory. During the offseason, I really liked the Devin Singletary signing, but we've seen him get usurped by Tyrone Tracy and all but disappear. Only 101 carries, 394 yards, and 4 touchdowns so far this season. How are you feeling about him long term?
If he stays in New York, he's probably Tyrone Tracy's handcuff. If he goes somewhere else, I would have to look and, we'd have to really evaluate that situation. I feel like he's headed into the team's RB3 special teams era of his career where he hangs around for the next 3 or 4 years, bouncing from team to team, maybe starts the season as a free agent and lands on a team because of injuries. And because he's been around the block, he's able to step in and start a few games. I kind of feel like we're headed into that era of Devin Singletary's career.
Also hard to know how good anyone on the Giants is until they get a real
Fair
team.
enough. I mean, he's got $7 million in dead cap after the season, or 6, excuse me. So they could get rid of him at a fairly reasonable cost as well.
Yeah, a lot of changes probably coming to New York this offseason. Meanwhile, Michael Penix Jr. made his debut. I saw someone call it near flawless. He was 18 of 27, 202 yards, no touchdowns, an interception, carried the ball 4 times for 3 yards. Was it near flawless for you?
So he had a, 67% completion rate. I wonder what I typed a note that says 7.48 attempts, 11.22 completions. I don't know what that means.
I think that's the yardage. So he averaged
Oh,
7.8
7.
yards per attempt and
That's
11
right.
yards per completion.
So good call. Good call. That's exactly what it means. So he was in the upper half of quarterbacks in the league in his yards per attempt and yards per completion. He didn't blow anybody away. It's not like he was top 5 or top 10 with those numbers, but we've seen a lot of quarterbacks down there with the 4 and 5 yards per attempt, 7, 8 yards per completion. So he was QB 30 in his first game. He knew who to get the ball to. London, Mooney, McLeod, they led with targets. I think they were like 9, 8, and 7 targets. Bijan and Algier carried the ball a combined 33 times. So it was a run-heavy game, even though he threw 27 passes. He didn't have to take any chances because they were up against a lousy team. What is it? They were 17-7 at halftime. They coasted in the second half. So all in all, I don't know if I'd call it flawless. I'd say it was a relatively easy attempt. If I'm Kirk Cousins, I'd have been like, really? You're going to give him the Giants? I could have got back on track against the Giants.
Yeah, we'll probably have a better idea after we see him play the Commanders on Sunday night.
Yeah.
Next up, the Lions went to Chicago, got the 34-17 victory. Big third year for Jameson Williams. We've seen him explode at times. Hasn't always been consistent, but 5 for 143 and a touchdown on Sunday. He's heading into year 4. I think when he was drafted by the Lions and in rookie drafts, people hoped maybe a premier wide receiver 1. I don't know if he'll ever be that for the Lions, but how do you feel about him long term?
He provides an explosiveness to that Detroit offense that Jahmyr Gibbs is the only other person on that team that has that kind of explosiveness. He can get deep. He's fast. I love what he brings to the table. If I can get him as my wide receiver 3, he's currently wide receiver 26 on the year. As we're headed into year 4, I'd like to see more consistency, but I'm willing to sign up for the volatility of him as my wide receiver 3 because there's going to be weeks where he gets you 25 points, and it's just phenomenal. He just makes things happen. He's dynamic. I think the pairing of him and Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're all very, very strong at what they do. It gives Jared Goff, then you add in Gibbs and Montgomery. The offense, I think if they do anything offensive on the season, in the offseason, they need to keep investing in that offensive line. Taylor Decker's missed a bunch of games. They could probably use another strong interior offensive lineman. Let's keep it rolling.
Meanwhile, we have another kind of interesting wide receiver prospect for Chicago, and that's rookie Rome Odunze. Probably quietly had a better rookie season than you realize, given the uneven nature of the Bears. 95 targets so far, 51 receptions, 701 yards, and 3 touchdowns. How do you feel about him long term?
See, to quote my good friend Larry David, pretty good. Odunze, he was the third guy when they signed Keenan Allen. I think by and large we tempered our expectations. Love him for dynasty. He's ready, I think, to slide right in to the wide receiver 2 role when they let Keenan Allen walk. They don't need to spend a bunch of money on Keenan Allen. Whoever comes in as the new coach, and I don't know if they end up getting a new GM too, but they may decide, hey, we want to bring Keenan Allen back. Let's get the band back together. But if they don't, Odunze, I think, has shown himself. Him and DJ Moore could be, each year I look at teams and I kind of do this dynamic duo, like who are a pair of wide receivers that you are okay if you have both of them on your team. There's Devonta Smith and AJ Brown and Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think going into next year, if it's just these two and somebody insignificant, even with the struggles that Caleb Williams has had this year, I might put DJ Moore and Rome Odunze in that dynamic duo group.
Next up, the Cleveland Browns met the Cincinnati Bengals. Was not a good game. It was 24-6 Bengals, kind of a ho-hum experience for the Browns. Nick Chubb has had a couple of knee injuries now, has a broken foot that ended his year. We've seen Jerome Ford come in and do fairly well for him. Got to be fair to wonder what the long-term fantasy future is for Chubb. So how are you feeling about Ford?
Ford is like a level up from a Jag. He's pretty good. He was RB23 last year.
So it's like a fully loaded Jag?
Yeah. He's just, he's not just a guy, but he's a little bit better than that. He's got good speed. He's a good receiver. He's not terribly shifty, so he's more of a straight line runner. But he was RB23 last year carrying the load. Or excuse me, RB16 in 2023. Let me get my notes straight. And so I think he's shown that he has the ability to be a starter. And if they've got, Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore and David Njoku in the passing game, irrespective of who their quarterback is right now, we're not going to worry about that. But with that pass receiving group, you can be very productive as an offense with a running back of Jerome Ford's caliber. I feel for Nick Chubb. I know he's going to go into the offseason and he is going to work his ass off. He didn't have a lot of burst when he came back this year. So, what will he have next year after coming off another injury? I think if I'm the Browns, I'm definitely keeping Jerome Ford around, and I'm 100% comfortable to slide him into my starting lineup if I'm them. And if I'm a fantasy manager with the understanding that, he's probably going to get a 70%, 65% share of the workload. He's a 3-down back.
Meanwhile, for the Bengals, we think T. Higgins probably leaving this offseason. They have it's Burton. Is it Jeremiah? Jerome? He hasn't played enough for me to totally remember his name. But Andre Iosivas continues to contribute 3 for 53 and a touchdown on Sunday. Is that a guy that you might hold this offseason to see how things shake out?
I think he definitely is. And when you're in the off season in Dynasty, you're looking for targets that you can acquire pretty cheap that may have some upside. If Iosivas can slide into the wide receiver 2 role in Cincinnati, Burrow likes him, 31 receptions. He's averaging 13.2 yards a catch, scored 6 touchdowns on the year. He'll be going into his 3rd year. Is he as good as T. Higgins? No, he's not as good as T. Higgins. Is he as big a headache as T. Higgins? No, he's not as big a headache as T. Higgins either. So he's one of those guys that could just go out there and fly under the radar because he doesn't cause issues. And when he gets his chance, he makes stuff happen. I like Iosivas a lot. I just, it's one of those things where, 10 days ago, Joe Burrow started talking about we need to do whatever it takes to keep T. Higgins in Cincinnati. And, Cincinnati wants to keep Joe Burrow happy. So we'll see. I don't think they franchise tag him again. I also don't think they can afford to keep him. But, they've already shown they're willing to play with an awful defense.
Yeah. Or a defense that hardly exists. Next up, the Tennessee Titans went to Indianapolis. Colts getting the 38-30 win to hold on to those slim playoff chances. It was the Mason Rudolph era beginning for the Tennessee Titans. What did you think?
Did it begin?
I thought it was a better offense than what we've seen with Will Levis the last few weeks.
So, Mason Rudolph, he's 7th year in the league now. So we're moving into that. It wouldn't surprise me if next year we see him in one of those Progressive backup commercials. I think he's in that career backup, low end bridge quarterback. There's a lot of bad backup.
Year 5.
He missed one. He didn't play one full year. Are you accounting for that?
Oh, I guess 22. Well, this is his 5th season putting up stats.
Right. So he'll be going into his 7th year. He's one of those guys he's got a fairly low ceiling, but if I can get 252 and 2 out of him fairly consistently, I think if they put up 30 points, that's a respectable day. I don't think he's not a guy that I probably don't want him any higher than QB4 on my dynasty team, with the understanding that maybe he gets in there. I just have concerns about his ability to hold on to a job.
Yeah, and I think the real question is going to be what are the options for the Titans? Because we talked about, I think Rudolph would be better as a backup quarterback. You have right now, if it locked today, the Giants would have the number 1 overall pick. We would think they're taking a quarterback, although there have been rumblings that Shedeur Sanders told them he wouldn't play for them. So interesting. New England probably not taking a quarterback. Jacksonville, I wouldn't think taking a quarterback, but Tennessee's sitting there at 4. If we think there's 2 good quarterbacks in this draft, potentially could grab one. Cleveland, hard to tell. Las Vegas, I think, definitely needs a quarterback. Carolina, but the Jets might want to come up. Saints are at 10, might want to come up. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. We know Kirk Cousins likely getting put free. Sam Darnold will be a free agent. There's not a ton of options. It'll be interesting as we get into February to start looking at the landscape and how we're feeling about these options.
So I'd love to see Mason Rudolph sign with Miami. I feel like
to be a good backup to Tua.
I feel like his play style, he can do the thing. He's pretty accurate with the ball. I think they would put him in a position with those playmakers there that if he had to play, it would be good for Miami. Ideally, you don't want Tua to miss time, but I think that would be one of those things where if I'm Miami, I'm good. I could see Miami. They maybe go get Aiden O'Connell if he's available. I don't think Gardner, maybe Gardner, but I mean Miami.
All these guys are still under contract going in.
Yeah, Miami needs to get a top-notch backup quarterback, and they need to. They're with Tua's injury history and concussion history. Miami's backup quarterback should be the best backup quarterback in the league.
Meanwhile, for the Colts, last week was a rough one for Jonathan Taylor as he had that touchdown turnover at the goal line. He made up for it on Sunday, 29 carries, 218 yards, 3 touchdowns. Was this an encouraging sign?
It was from the standpoint of he racked up a whole bunch of fantasy points this week. It doesn't do us any good. You got knocked out because he got cute and dropped that ball at the half-yard line. You're not terribly happy. He's had 3 RB1 games, including this week where he was the RB1. He's had 4 running back 2 games. The Colts need to learn how to consistently play with Richardson. And a lot of that comes down to Richardson just getting better. I don't see any reason, even with Taylor missing 2 or 3 games, that he should only have 1 more reception than Trey Sermon on this team. He's a capable receiver. Should he have 50 or 60 receptions? Probably not. But he shouldn't have 15 to Trey Sermon's 14.
He should think their passing game is consistent enough, and that might be something that'll grow. But I think that's where, we've seen that be a struggle for the wide receivers in Indianapolis too.
I get it. Let's see. Downs led him in targets this week with 4. They threw 11 passes and they won. And they threw 11 passes and scored 38 points.
They are a running team.
They are.
Next up, another dime of a game. The Los Angeles Rams visited the New York Jets in New York. It was a cold day. It was 19-9 Los Angeles.
It was a cold and dreary day in New York City.
The Rams go in, get the victory. Tyler Higbee returned from being out most of the year. Only saw 2 targets, but wouldn't you know, one was a reception for a touchdown. How do you feel about him?
That's Matthew Stafford saying, welcome back, Tyler Higbee. You know, he turns 32 on New Year's Day. He's under contract through 2025. It feels like he's going to be their tight end. That you know, if McVay stays, McVay likes his guys. He knows what he's going to get from Higbee. He knows Higbee isn't going to cause a lot of trouble, and that Higbee is willing to go 6 or 7 or 8 games with 2 or 3 targets a game, and he isn't going to get mad. He's going to go out there and he's going to block for Kyren Williams and Puka and Cooper Kupp. And it feels like Higbee's probably going to sign an extension, but not for a ton of money. And he's probably not going to be more than a low-end 1 if he gets hot. But he's probably more of a mid to high end 2 with some touchdown upside. I like Higbee fundamentally, but I just don't think there isn't a whole lot of passing volume outside of Kupp and Nakua. And then Kyren Williams used to get a decent amount, but he doesn't get any anymore.
I mean, they only completed 14 passes on Sunday, too. It was not a huge high-volume day. If you were rolling with Stafford or the receivers in a semifinal, you probably weren't too pumped either. On the other side, Garrett Wilson, he saw 7 targets, caught 6 for 54, but he seems to have been surpassed by Devontae Adams the last couple of weeks as the wide receiver that Rodgers favors. A lot of rumblings out of New York that he wants out. How are you feeling about Wilson?
I am delighted to buy low on him in Dynasty. If I can go get Garrett Wilson, I think it. So Rodgers is not there forever. They're making changes. Will he have some input on the next head coach? Maybe Woody Johnson's like, hey, let me bring in somebody to make you happy. Maybe Woody Johnson looks around and goes, you know what? Shut the F up. You got us into this mess every bit as much as Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas did.
I mean, we know for sure that Woody Johnson's going to consult his Madden rating before making any kind of decision.
Correct. He's been criminally misused by Rodgers and by the Jets. Right now, his value's clocking in at about the 104. But if I can get him for a late first-round pick in Dynasty, I'm going to go for it. I'll be looking around and doing some shopping, see if anybody's ready to get out of the Garrett Wilson business and get me into it. I've got several shares of Garrett Wilson. I'm still a believer, as noted by my plethora of Ohio State jerseys behind me. Even though that one's not really an Ohio State jersey. That was my son's jersey from the 2nd grade when he played.
Probably the best game of the weekend was the Eagles at the Commanders. Commanders pulling off the 36-33 victory, in part because Jalen Hurts got knocked out with a concussion. He is now in the protocol. Kind of a big game for the Eagles hosting the Cowboys this week. If Jalen Hurts can't clear and go, Kenny Pickett should be available, but being banged up his ribs as well. What does that do for the Eagles and their pursuit of number 1?
Well, that means that number 26 is going to put this team on his shoulders and carry them to the promised land. 29 for 150 and 2 touchdowns. Pickett didn't play terrible. He didn't set the world on fire. There are things that you can do with Jalen Hurts that you can't do with Kenny Pickett. And, 15 targets to
Just
AJ
throwing
Brown.
and running the ball. That's the only things you can do with Hurts.
Yeah.
Do with Kenny Pickett.
Devonta Smith had 8 targets. AJ Brown had 15. There were only 2 other people with targets.
Well, and to be fair, if you watched that game, if Devonta Smith holds on to the pass that was in his hands while he was wide open, that would have given him a first down with 2 minutes to go. Washington never gets the ball back.
Right. Now, I'm not. See, they're playing Dallas next week.
Yeah, they're hosting Dallas.
So let's see. They've got Dallas in week 17, who gives up the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So that's good. That means Kenny should, even if it is Kenny, he should be able to be productive. And then in week 18, they play the Giants and give up the 7th most to quarterbacks. So it's not like that he's playing, the Purple People Eaters or the Steel Curtain defense these next 2 weeks if Pickett plays. I feel that with the weapons they have, they will get the wins. But I also feel like Jalen Hurts felt like he could go back in, but we know how football players can be sometimes. The independent neurologist doing for him what he wouldn't do for himself right there. So,
yeah, well, he's in the protocol for a reason, hopefully.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, for Washington, Jaden Daniels has been among the leaders for Offensive Rookie of the Year all season, but 24-39, 258 yards, 5 passing touchdowns, 81 yards rushing. Is this the game that sews it up for him if he wins?
It sure feels like it's his award to lose. Bo Nix, I think, was really the only other guy giving him any push. And Nix would have to have, I think, 2 phenomenal weeks going forward, and Daniels would have to completely faceplant these next 2. I mean, he only threw for 258 yards, but he did throw 5 touchdowns. He ran for 81 yards. Game-winning drive, super exciting. It was all, I'm not terribly happy he threw 4 touchdown passes to Jamison Crowder and Olamide Zaccheaus. Zach Ertz could have used 1 or 2 of those, maybe McLaurin another one. Hell, Brian Robinson could have stood to have gotten one of those. But overall, Jaden Daniels has played phenomenal. I think the narrative that I'm going to be looking to dispel or avoid this offseason is that, will 2025 be for Jaden Daniels like it was for CJ Stroud? 24 was for CJ Stroud.
Yeah, well, let's hope he fares better than that. Next up, the Arizona Cardinals went to Carolina. It should have been a potential victory. Instead, they lose 36-30, get eliminated from the playoff competition. We've seen Arizona be really up and down. They've made some strides, 7 and 8, but they haven't done enough. What do you think they need to focus on this off season?
So, just between you and me, we're both Kyler Murray haters. I feel like they need to move on from Kyler Murray or move on from Drew Petzing. They've misused Marvin Harrison, running him on fly routes and 9 routes. He's more of a, but then Marvin also hasn't played as good as I would have liked to have seen him. He's hasn't been as strong at the catch point as I think his size says that he should. But there were a couple games where they ran a whole bunch of crossing routes with Harrison, and he put up phenomenal numbers. He has dropped from a low-end wide receiver 1 early in the season to a mid 2 to a low. He's wide receiver 36 on the year right now, I think it is. Where did he go? He's wide receiver 36. It doesn't feel like Kyler Murray has any faith in him, because it feels like Kyler Murray looks at him like a Madden player, and it's like, oh, I can just chuck it deep to him, and he's 6'3" and 218, and he's just going to overpower everybody. And that doesn't work in the NFL a lot. Michael Wilson is playing great. He's a nice number 2. Trey McBride is the tight end 3 on the year. James Conner just signed an extension. They like Trey Benson. So it feels like they're set. They need to bring in some more offensive linemen. Their defense is middle of the pack on versus the run and the pass. They could stand to upgrade some to get a little better, but it isn't like they're bottom end and giving up a shit ton of points or giving up a whole bunch of production to either the running or the passing. They're middle of the road. So they could stand to get some upgrades there. I just don't think Kyler Murray is the guy that's going to be able to get them there.
Yeah, going to be some hard questions to ask this offseason. Meanwhile, Bryce Young, 17 to 26, 158, 2 touchdowns though, no interceptions, runs for 68, adds a touchdown. They get a great rushing performance from Chuba Hubbard. Young feels like he's been a lot better since coming back off of that early benching. Do you think he's the quarterback week 1 in 2025?
Before I answer that, I want to ask you, how smart does the Chuba Hubbard extension look in the wake of Jonathan Brooks's most recent injury?
I mean, it looks it looks like they saw Brooks too. I was not incredibly taken with what we were seeing from Brooks coming back, and I think that there was a lot of rumblings that they were not seeing a lot in practice that had them encouraged, which is part of why they hadn't made it a real hurry to bring him back. Even after he got activated, he was a healthy scratch for his first game. I think they like what they have in Hubbard. Maybe they just didn't know exactly how that was going to work going into the season. You take a shot. Brooks it was decent value where they took Brooks, but I actually kind of am liking the Hubbard and Bryce Young combination right now. You know, I know they're only 4-11, but they feel like they're better than a 4-11 team, if that makes any sense.
Right. To me, this feels like a best case scenario. Your young quarterback is playing well. You're winning some games, but you're not winning a lot. So you'll be able to go up. You'll be in a position to get, maybe an anchor offensive tackle or an anchor defensive player. I like Bryce Young. He's QB 18 since week 8 when he came back. There's still some work to do. They don't have an established, alpha wide receiver. Leggett has had some games. David Moore has had some games. Jalen Coker has had some games, but none of them feels like what it felt like when they brought in Deontay Johnson, who face planted so hard. It feels like, they like Tremble at tight end. They like Jatavian Sanders, who's on IR. It feels like they're moving in the right direction. Bryce Young is getting better. He's building confidence, which is what you need. And I think this game where they pulled it out in overtime is a huge confidence boost for Bryce Young. Even if they lose the next 2, as long as they're competitive, I think that moves them into the off season with some momentum about, hey, we've got a plan. We're behind our coach. We're behind our quarterback. We're set at some positions. We need to boost others. I like how Young has developed since he came back. He has not seemed overmatched like he did last year and at the start of this year. I'm not sure what clicked, but something has. You're muted.
The Vikings went to Seattle and held on for the 27-24 victory. They're now 13-2 on the season. They are tied record-wise with the Lions, but still chasing them. How do you feel about the Vikings as contenders?
They have a lot of potent offensive players. Sam Darnold is having a career year, I think. But, he's got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, and TJ Hawkinson, and a pretty good offensive line. So he was set up to be successful. I think that what's really going to move Minnesota forward is Brian Flores in the defense. If they can make timely plays, get some turnovers, get some stops, as long as they can keep Minnesota's offense in plus territory, they're gonna be dangerous. I'm nervous for my Lions because our defense has gotten so injured, and Minnesota hasn't had that. Andrew Van Ginkel has been playing lights out. I know they lost Ivan Pace. I don't know if he's out for the year, if he'll come back, but overall they're playing really well on both sides of the ball. You got Jefferson at wide receiver 2, Addison at wide receiver 29, and Kleiman. Hawkinson is wide receiver 12, tight end 12 since he came back. Aaron Jones, running back 15, Darnold QB 7. The offense is performing, and with that defense, that makes them dangerous.
Seahawks, meanwhile, they were in first at various points. They're now one game behind the Rams. These two teams meet one more time in week 18, but some of the other metrics don't favor the Seahawks. How do you feel about their chances of catching the Rams for the playoffs?
Seattle can only control what they can control, and what they can control is they need to win out. If they do that, I think they put themselves in a position to potentially do it. They need the Rams to lose both of their last games. If Seattle wins, they're going to lose at least one of them. But both Rams games are divisional opponents, and so there's a little bit extra that goes into those games. So it could happen. I think I would give it a coin flip because San Francisco is playing for pride next week against the Rams,
against the Lions.
Yeah, excuse me. Who do the Rams play next week? I thought they're playing a division game. They playing the Cardinals?
They're playing Arizona on Saturday.
Oh. Well, Seattle can only control what Seattle can control, and that is they've got to win their last two to have a shot.
Yep, we'll see if they can get it done. Next up, the New England Patriots went to Buffalo, and this was a lot closer than anyone expected, 21-24. The Bills hang on for the victory. Drake May, another pretty good game, 22 of 36, 261, 2 TDs, an INT, carried the ball 6 times for 30 yards. Is this an encouraging sign that he is a good franchise guy to build around?
Yeah, I like what I've seen from Drake May. That touchdown pass, 28-yard touchdown pass to Kayshon Boutte was beautiful. He dropped it right in over the defender's shoulder. Boutte made a nice catch. I'm torn because I like what I'm seeing from Kayshon Boutte, but I don't know if it's one of those. You know how in years past you see some relatively unheralded wide receiver have a great year because there's just nobody else, and then the next year they're like wide receiver 5 on the team. I'm nervous that that's what's happening with Kayshon Boutte. But he could also be the team's legitimate wide receiver 2 next year and put up, 70 catches and 900 yards. So I think Boutte has really blossomed this year, and it's helped Drake May have somebody that's been consistent besides Hunter Henry. Ramondre Stevenson had a decent game. It would have been nice if they maybe didn't give Antonio Gibson 10 carries and kept giving that volume to Stevenson, who is being a whole hell of a lot more successful with it. But, I'm not calling the plays there. So, but yeah, I like May. He is, what did I? He's QB 12 since he took over week 6. Yeah, he's shown a lot of growth, even with the rumblings about the Crafts being unhappy with Gerard Mayo and stuff. It doesn't seem to have phased Drake May. He's just going out there and making plays.
Meanwhile, do you think this was kind of a trap game for Buffalo?
It was a division game. Those always have a little extra mustard on them. And, New England's wanting to step up because all they've heard the last 2 or 3 years is about how good Josh Allen in Buffalo is. So they were doing doing what they could. You know, it was about a 50-50 split on time of possession.
Feels like teams have really struggled the week after playing the Lions too, and I wonder if that just took a lot out of.
It's, you know, you got to put up a lot of points against the Lions. You know, there's no doubt about it, because because the Lions can't stop anybody. But, you know, James Cook, 100 yards on 11 carries. You love that for fantasy. Josh Allen didn't have a great game, 184 total yards, but only one touchdown pass. I think Gerard Mayo, you know, is getting some things done with the defense there. You know, he played in a lot of great defenses in New England, and I think part of the reason that New England made him coach was he was able to articulate what he learned playing and coaching under Bill Belichick. So, you know, we're too quick, I think, sometimes to discard players and coaches and not see what they've learned. You know, we're also, I think, too quick sometimes to hold on to them when they've shown us who they are. But I think Mayo's back next year. I think McDermott's getting to that point where, you know, he's starting to turn into Marty Schottenheimer, always having real good teams and just can never get over the hump. And so he needs to get to the Super Bowl to, you know, and win it to get over that Schottenheimer hump.
Next up, not the game of the day. The what?
It's a hashtag trademark, Schottenheimer hump.
Jacksonville Jaguars visited the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders held on for the 19-14 victory. Mac Jones, one of those quarterbacks that will be a free agent after the season, 25-39, 247 yards, TD, no INTs. Had a terrible first game, I think, coming in for Trevor Lawrence, but hasn't been too bad of late. What do you feel about him in fantasy?
You know, I have mixed emotions because I'd like to see he feels like one of those guys that's not going to be able to earn his way back if he doesn't get to play. But if you're playing him, it's going to be because your team is awful, and like how much value is there in playing for an awful team? The Jaguars have some weapons. You know, he gets the job. 13 targets to Brian Thomas Jr., 9 receptions, 139 yards and 32 yards and a touchdown. 6 to Washington, 4 to Strange. Those are probably the next best receivers on the team. So, you know, he kept his funnel pretty close to where it was, 23 out of 39 targets to those top 3 guys. They didn't get a ton of support from the run game. Bigsby had an okay game, 50 yards and a touchdown with a 4.2 yard per carry average. It was 2 bad teams playing mediocre football.
Indeed. Speaking of quarterbacks, Aiden O'Connell, you know, he's been better probably coming in as a starter than what we've seen from others. I still think the Raiders go quarterback. Do you?
I think they have to. The downside is what you said in the last draft order.
They did not want to win this game because it moved them from being like number 2 to number 6.
Yeah, and I whoever is number 2, who you said right now, it's the Patriots?
Yeah, it's the Patriots right now.
So the Patriots are going to be willing to trade.
Yeah.
You know, whatever.
Although, you know, if I'm New England, I honestly might look at taking Travis Hunter because
right.
You figure the Giants are going to take a quarterback unless they're dumb, which we can't rule that out. But
right.
Hunter, I could see the Patriots being a team that would actually embrace playing him on both sides of the ball, which is what he said he wanted.
And I get that. I just think it diminishes effectiveness because you can't be a true lockdown corner. You're not going to play 80% of the snaps on each side of the ball in the NFL. You're just not. So you can't be a true lockdown corner if you're out 25, 30, 40% of the snaps. And you can't be a true elite wide receiver if you're out 25, 30, 40% of the snaps. I don't know. I get the wish. We've seen it happen before with players playing both ways a little bit. And I think that's what it'll be. I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't know if Hunter's best served to play cornerback or wide receiver primarily, because he's looked so good in college doing both. But yeah, the Raiders need to get themselves in position to get Shadir Sanders or Cam Ward. I don't know how far I'd go to get Jalen Milroe. He seems to be the guy who's third on the list in the rookie class for quarterbacks. And really I think the first round talent kind of ends there, but there's certainly a gap between Milroe and the other two.
Next up, the Miami Dolphins hosted the San Francisco 49ers, got the 29-17 victory. We thought we might see more running from Deebo Samuel. Indeed, we did. 5 carries for 25 yards, but that also sparked the pass game where he caught 7 for 96 and a touchdown, one of his best games of the year. Is that an encouraging sign?
The production is encouraging. I just don't know that 14 opportunities and 12 touches for Deebo makes the most sense. The carries, he can do that, but he's also a guy that's shown the propensity to get injured when used week after week at a high volume. So what are they going to do next week? Are they going to give him another 15 touches? Unfortunately, Patrick Taylor, there were a lot of people that were like picking him up and plugging him into their lineups, and he let a lot of people down.
The magic of whoever's playing running back for the 49ers.
Right. It ends at
RB. Yeah.
So no, I feel Samuel is one of their most talented players, and you want to get him the ball. 7 receptions for 96 and a touchdown. To me, that was great. Are the 25 yards on the ground make or break, or did it just put him in a position to get injured? I don't know. I would have liked to have seen a little more production out of Juwan Jennings as somebody who started Juwan Jennings in a couple spots. But the targets were consolidated pretty well. Kittle, Samuel, and Jennings, and that's what you want, and that's what you want to see. It was spread out in the running game. I mean, Taylor led with 8, Samuel had 5, Purdy 4.
I feel like the carries more just maybe kept Samuel in the flow of the game, and maybe that's
right.
why they've gotten away from it. Miami, meanwhile, still alive technically for a playoff spot, 7-8. They've been a little better of late. They built this offensive core around Tua, Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and now Jonnu Smith. Do you think they keep that core together going into 2025?
I think you should. It's they've got. I think Mostert moves on as the number 2. I think they're willing to use Jeff Wilson, who's going to be discounted. They have Jalen Wright that they really like out of Tennessee, I think.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just grab another rookie to mix with Wright and Achane.
Yeah, and I also wouldn't be surprised if they brought in another veteran. I mean, there's going to be several running backs out there that are familiar with the offensive scheme because San Francisco used 36 running backs this year. So we can grab any one of those as our backup in Miami because that seems to be what Mike McDaniel likes to do. But honestly, they've got so much talent there that to me, they need to, fortify the offensive line. The defense is pretty good. Give some help there. Bring in a veteran backup quarterback that's going to be able to step in, and they need somebody that can play like Cooper Rush. He's not going to get you to the promised land, but he's not going to embarrass you out there either. He's going to get the ball to the top dogs. And that's, like I said, go get Mason Rudolph, put him behind Tua, pay him handsomely. He'll be ready when you need him. Or at least the second game you need him.
Couple more games on the Week 16 slate, and then we'll look at the three that are going to play before Friday before we get out of here. But the Cowboys hosted the Buccaneers Sunday Night Football, got the 26-24 victory. Another solid game for Jalen McMillan. He has come on of late, now sitting at 27 receptions, 336 yards on 5 touchdowns. Do you like him going forward?
I do. He's looked really, really good. I think that, we'll see what Godwin looks like coming back. I feel like Godwin, is he a free agent after this year? Do you remember?
No, he's neither of them are.
So having Jalen McMillan then on a rookie deal gives you a third receiver that can be very productive. And depending on how how Evans and Godwin fare, McMillan can step up. Cade Otton was, they got to figure out how to use him when they have healthy wide receivers, because I think he showed he deserved some opportunity. But then again, when you've got Bucky Irving and Rachaad White and even Sean Tucker producing like they did in the running game, something's got to give, and clearly it was the tight end position once they started getting people healthy. Mayfield, he completed passes to 9 different players. I think the Buccaneers have a solid offense, and I think Jalen McMillan has a potential to slide into a prominent role when given the opportunity.
Meanwhile, we saw Jalen Tolbert get a touchdown catch for the Cowboys. He quietly 42 receptions for 482 yards and 6 touchdowns this season. How do you feel about him going forward?
It feels like he's pushing Brandon Cooks off the roster. It's going to be that wide receiver 2 for Dallas next year. They have another Jalen. I forget his last name.
Brooks, I think.
Brooks. So that's made a couple plays. They've got Ryan Flournoy, Schoonmaker's their second tight end. So given their cap situation, it feels like they need to move on from Brandon Cooks, because even if he's a free agent, he's going to want more money than they're going to be paying these young guys, and they've got plenty of holes they need to fill. So that puts Tolbert as the wide receiver 2 here, and I think he's ready for it. Wide receiver 53 on the year. Wouldn't surprise me if he steps up a couple more spots, maybe gets into that low-end wide receiver 4 range by the end of the season.
Monday Night Football was a horrendous matchup. The Green Bay Packers winning 34-0 over the New Orleans.
It wasn't that good.
Yeah. Spencer Rattler, we've seen an extended audition from him this season. I feel like I've seen enough. He was 15 of 30 last night, 153 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception for the season, completing 56% of the passes for 859 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. What do you think his future is?
I don't have those numbers for Spencer. I have him 15 for 30, 153, 0 and 1.
Yeah, I gave you his season long.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I got distracted. I confuse easily in the mornings.
Yeah, I did he only had 153 last night. He only has 859, 2 and 3 for the season, only 56% completion. So last night was interesting. He had some balls that were thrown into the dirt, and I know he was under pressure, and so I didn't see close enough. I didn't rewind and look to see, like, was he hit and that's what caused it? But there were several passes that either went into the dirt or were just high and didn't look good. There were also a few passes that were just dropped, that hit people in the hands, should have been caught and just weren't. I don't think he's as of right now, he's not the answer. He does have a pretty big arm. He does have some tools.
he's not ready. I don't think I don't think Jake Hayner's the answer or ready either. But they're just trying to get to week 19.
Yeah, he did get hit. They don't have great protection. He doesn't have any weapons out there. So there were a few balls that hit guys in the hands and they put on the ground, but you're right. He did have some.
I mean, they didn't have any running game to speak of. It was just.
I don't think we've seen anything from him that would indicate that he's a guy they're going to go with moving forward. He feels like he probably will end up kind of as a career backup.
Yeah. He certainly looked like he showed up to a gunfight with a knife last night.
Meanwhile, Jordan Love, second full season as a starter. He's been fine, but definitely not reached the heights he did in his first year as a starter last year, where he had 32 touchdowns, only 11 interceptions. This year, only 24 touchdowns so far, but still has 11 interceptions. Doesn't feel like he's throwing for quite as much in the way of yardage, perhaps because they have a better running game. But how are you feeling about him as a long-term fantasy asset?
I feel pretty solid. I think they don't have an elite wide receiver, but they've got 3 or 4 very good ones. They've got a pretty good tight end. Josh Jacobs has been very strong as the running back. I think Love has played within his ability. He's not trying to do too much. And he is only in his second year starting, so I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Well, that'll do it for looking at the Week 16 slate, but we do have 3 big games going on before we come back on Friday. The first is 2 Christmas Day matchups, both on Netflix. The first, Kansas City Chiefs 14-1 at the 10-5 Pittsburgh Steelers. What are you expecting from that one?
Kansas City, I think they're going to do what they do, which is, it's crazy to say, but they've kind of been winning ugly this year. And I think they're going to go ahead and grind it out. Their defense is playing really well. They're going to they're like in the bottom third in the league in sacks. They're in like the top 10 in QB hits and QB pressures. So they're going to get some pressure on Russell Wilson. I don't think they give up a lot of yards to Harris or Warren. And then on the offensive side of the ball, getting Hollywood Brown back, I think gives them, that veteran receiver to kind of play between Xavier Worthy and DeAndre Hopkins that can get deep but still work in the intermediate area. So now they've got more passing weapons. Joey Porter Jr. can only guard one player per play, so that gives them those weapons. Unfortunately, I think it's not going to be a great Travis Kelce game, but if I was, my players, I don't know if I could sit Kelce yet but I definitely am. I think Worthy has earned his opportunities and he provides the big play. So I'm okay with Worthy in the wide receiver 3 range because he's only been back a week and I just haven't seen enough. I'm a little nervous about Hollywood Brown, but I would probably start him in the flex spot if I had him. In the running game, I just don't think there's enough volume there for any one guy to really rely on either Hunt or Pacheco.
I'm taking the Steelers in this one.
I'm going Chiefs. Look at you getting squirrely.
I think the Steelers need it more. Next up, the Baltimore Ravens 10-5 at the Houston Texans 9-6. What are you expecting from this matchup?
It feels like it's going to be a bit of a grind on the Texans' part. They've lost Tank Dell, so that leaves just Nico Collins. They don't have Stephon Diggs. So it's Collins and Collins and Schultz that are going to do the heavy lifting in the passing game. So who else is going to step up? Is it going to be Robert Woods? Is it going to be Xavier Hutchinson?
John Mechie.
Or John Mechie. So somebody else is.
They also
to
claimed Deontay Johnson, so I'm going to be curious to see if he makes it onto the field.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I don't think he makes it on the field this week, but and I think that the Ravens defense is good enough. I don't think Mixon has a huge day, so it's going to be on the shoulders of C.J. Stroud to get it done against the Ravens. And I'm not 100% sold. I think the Ravens, with the explosiveness they have on offense and the running game with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, I just think it's going to be too much for the Texans. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was an 8-point game.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Ravens as well. The Texans are kind of beat up. They've already earned their playoff slot, and I don't think there's any way they can really improve their seed. So I think they'll make the playoffs. They're not quite as dynamic a team as I thought they might be back in August.
Right.
Thursday night, our final Thursday night game of the season on Prime, the 8-7 Seattle Seahawks with a lot to play for at the 4-11 Chicago Bears with pride to play for. What are you expecting?
It's going to be in Chicago. It's not like the Seahawks never play in poor weather, but I don't know that it gets as cold in Seattle as it does in Seattle indoor? No, it's outdoor, isn't it?
They have an outdoor stadium, yeah.
Yeah. So, they get more rain than they do cold and snow. The Seahawks, Kenneth Walker just seemed to throw a monkey wrench in their running game. He just wasn't as productive despite his explosive ability as Zach Charbonnet had been while he was out. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been on a tear. DK Metcalf got in the end zone. With the Bears, we know it's the usual suspects at wide receiver. It'll come down to, can Caleb Williams keep it together at the quarterback position, I think. I just think the Seahawks end up making one or two more plays than the Bears, and I think the Seahawks win it.
Yep, I am taking the Seahawks as well. Well, that'll do it for us today. We will be back on Friday looking at these three games and previewing the rest of the slate. 3 games coming at you on Saturday. Not as many Sunday games and not as many great Sunday matchups. And then the final Monday night football game of the regular season. So still a lot of football out there to be played. Hope you guys have a wonderful holiday and Merry Christmas. And we will see you on Friday.
Ho, ho, ho.